Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Sunday Night Live, the automotive show and power sports at times. It talks about all things fixed ops, variable ops, you name it. If it has to do with the business, we cover it. I bring in the experts to share what they do because they're the experts. And you learn from other people that have already done something by watching them do it, as opposed to spending all the time to try to figure it out yourself. So last week we had a really cool show with Kurt Von Annen, and unfortunately we did not get to any of the questions that I wanted to ask because it was just such an engaging show. I learned so much in that one that I said, you know what, I'm not doing him or the show justice by not covering those things that I wanted to cover. So we figured we're going to do part two back to back with number one, because that way we can get into the exact questions that I wanted to ask. Automotive and power sports are similar in ways and dissimilar in other ways. By watching last week's show, if you didn't see it, you can catch it on the replay. It always lives on my profile on LinkedIn, it lives on YouTube, and it lives on Facebook in probably 30 different automotive groups. So Kurt, welcome back, man.
It's awesome to be back, Paul. Thanks for having me, man. This is great.
Now, another thing we missed last week is part of the show is not only sharing knowledge with the audience, but also sharing what you do. So I don't want to miss anybody knowing exactly what you do. So I would like you to kind of lay out exactly what it is that you do, and then we'll jump into some of the questions.
Absolutely, Paul. The elevator speech for me as a person would be, I'm Kurt Von Annen. I'm a small business advisor, consultant, but I really specialize in communication tools like learning and membership websites. And so I kind of incorporate technology with communication and leadership and help businesses grow and thrive. As a part of that, Mañana No Mas is my main company name. That's the umbrella. But the Powersport Academy is one of the two major projects that Mañana No Mas runs directly. And that's where I'm able to bring my passion for powersport service training right to the forefront, because I already know the content and I'm passionate about the content, but I use the Mañana No Mas platform to build the whole virtual experience for it. And so it's a really good symbiotic relationship between the two projects, and I just love what I do.
So now you build websites for the power sports industry.
Yes.
And you do training also.
Absolutely.
In the Powersports Academy.
Yeah. So when I was working for the OEMs, I did about 20 years of dealer experience mixed with automotive, right? So I have a lot of automotive experience. I have a lot of power sports experience. And then I wrote a book on the subject called Service Writing in Black and White. That book was picked up by Ducati. Ducati brought me in as an OEM trainer for them. And I just fell in love with the whole process. I love doing it. But in that process, I made myself an expert in WordPress development, and then using those tools like the membership and the learning tools to build communities online. So the number one complaint that dealers gave me when I was an OEM trainer was travel expenses. I can't have someone out of the shop for 3 days. I don't want to pay for a hotel and rental car. The per diem's killing me. They're not even generating revenue. This is, you might offer the training for free, but this is costing me a fortune, right? And so when I built the Mañana No Mas Powersport Academy, the first consideration I had was, how can I bring these dealers the value that they require with eliminating that travel expectation? And so I built the virtual example, and then I support the virtual example, the static lessons, with the live conference calls every month. And that subscription to the live calls is like the magic. It's what helps the engagement, the retention, and really drives the results of the training program.
Well, we talked last week about there being a shortage in the labor pool, the quality labor pool, even more so than in automotive. So I would imagine that a platform such as yours would be extremely welcome, because, we talk about in the automotive space, people not wanting to leave the store. So in the power sports space, not only don't they want to leave the store, they really can't leave the store. So
they don't have the coverage. You know, in the automotive world, there's so many elements of redundancy, right? Like if a service writer is out, there's generally someone that can fill in, right? If the parts manager is out or the counter person's out, there's generally someone that can fill in. There's redundancy. In the power sports environment, a lot of these smaller dealerships, and by small, I mean 12, 15, 20 people, they all have specific jobs. There's not redundancy created from like parts to service or technician to front counter. And so it's very difficult to be without these key personnel for issues like, you know, OEM training.
Now, let me get to a couple of comments here because I hate running behind. Robert Allen Carvel, welcome, says hello from Atlanta, Georgia. And Ron Usher, my favorite retired tech, no questions, just hi. John Neeb says hi. Robert Allen Carvel says raced AMA Southern Circuit 81 to 82, Yamaha sponsored.
Nice.
Sounds like he's a fellow road rash guy.
Yeah. I did AMA, CCS, WIRA, the MRA, the SMRI. I was in all those groups. And like I said last week, if you're trying to look me up on the internet, I'm going to be the guy at the bottom of the row. I wasn't fast, but I sure had a lot of fun.
Well, here's the funny part. I did a lot of racing myself, but the class I was in was the street class. I raced on the streets, you know, where you've got cars, where you've got dogs, where you've got people that look you dead in the eye. And then just before you get to them, they pull out and they say, oh, I never saw you. Well, what were you looking at?
What were you looking at?
You know?
Well, when we used to race at Pocono, about every year a deer would jump on the track, and about every year somebody would hit one. So, so you weren't always safe at the racetrack, but it was always interesting.
That's got to be painful because I know I've seen cars hit deers and total the car. So I can imagine you smack into a deer at a high speed. It's not going to look good.
It's not pretty. No.
Jared Kalfas, how are you, Jared? He says the power sports and recreational vehicle markets are on fire. When you look at the retail sales, the dealership consolidation, and the buy-sell activity over the last year, and other activities surrounding the spaces, the verticals are growing substantially. Marine, boat are next. I was talking to a buddy of mine that he sells RVs. And he says it's just blowing up.
Yeah.
He's selling RVs like flapjacks. It's like, did you want large fries with that RV? I mean, it's literally that crazy.
The big question in all of these industries, because I have friends in all of them, right? So power sports, marine, I'm loosely affiliated with a lot of the marine activity as well. I'm open to RV, but I don't really have ties business-wise with RV, but I'm familiar with it. And even the bicycles, right? All of those are similar types of activities in motivation with customers. And we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's like, as the rest of everything begins to reopen, right? As COVID begins to dissipate and restaurants are open and gyms are open and museums are open and the movies are open, right? So think of all these things we used to distract ourselves with. Those distractions were turned off and people said, oh my God, I got to get out of the house. And they went and bought motorcycles and RVs and mountain bikes. And now you can't get anything. And the supply chain was broken before COVID, right? Just got worse with COVID. And so now everyone's nervous. They're all like, okay, we've got this. This is our opportunity. This is our second chance at life. We can rejuvenate, right? For those of the religious nature, they would say revival's coming, revival. And so we're all waiting for a revival. But the other hand is like, what if this is a bubble and it breaks? You know, so people are trying not to be over enthusiastic. They're trying to be cautious, but it is exciting. There's a lot of product hitting the street and a lot of new people come into all of these sports. So marine, motorcycle, ATV, UTV, mountain bikes. There's a lot of new customers coming to the market. And there's so many cultural things to consider from a sales perspective on how we nurture these newbies to the sport, to the activity.
You know, I was amazed that, different industries grow at different levels and or perform at different levels. And the automotive space I'm very familiar with because I've been in it for a long time. But then the power sports space is behind automotive. And the boating part of it is even it is lagging towards the latter part of the power sports segment. So I found that very interesting. Robert Allen Carvel says, but technicians like live classes, hands-on.
Oh, absolutely.
The type of training that you're talking about, are you talking about process training, which one can do over the internet easily, or are we talking about specific technical training, which is the actual working components? And before you answer that, to your point, Robert, I can fix pretty much anything, even the stuff I don't know about. And the way I fix it is I watch a YouTube video. And I'll give you some examples. My nav system on my old Lexus had gone. I went to the dealer. They wanted $3,000 for a nav system. I'm not spending that. It's just not going to happen. So I start doing the usual digging that people do on the internet, start asking the questions. And the next stop was a $2,000 used setup. Yeah, I'm not spending that either. And then I looked and I determined that I found out that in a nav system, you have the processor, the DVD drive that reads the data, and then you have the screen that displays the data. The particular error code that I found had to do, in my opinion, with the reading of the data, the DVD part of it. So upon further digging, I found a place in Cincinnati that for $279 plus postage rebuilds DVD drives. I figured, you know what, $300, I'll take the shot. I sent it out. It came back. The guy calls me up, wanted the upsell. Hey, I have the disc has some scratches, $50, I can clean it up. I said, you know what? I'm one of those psychos that buys a new disc every year anyway, so don't worry about it. I need to replace it, so I'll just take it the way it is. So I get this thing back in the mail. I pop it into my dashboard. I connect everything. No bolts or screws left over. That's always a good sign. I pound the dash. No rattle. We're looking good. I put the disc in. Reading. Bam. There it is. I fixed it for $300. I had a problem with the washing machine. I typed in a Google search the noise that it made. Okay, this is how crazy search is today. The noise took me to a YouTube video that showed me how to take the machine apart. I figured the machine's not working now, I've got nothing to lose. I followed the instructions. I never worked on a washer before. I took it apart, and sure enough, when I got to the piece between the motor and the transmission, there was the little plastic here in the video that was split in half. Hey, mine looked the same way. And in that video, there was a link that took me to where I could buy the piece. I bought the piece, and the machine worked for quite some time. So when you say technicians like live classes and hands-on, I might dispute that, but you probably forgot the first part of the question, which is it primarily process training, or is it mechanical training on how to rebuild something, or is it a combination of all?
So forgive me, Paul, but I want to make sure I answer the question fully, right? Yeah. So Mañana No Mas, Powersport Academy, our training is really focused on administrative, customer-facing, team-facing communication, leadership, and process training. Okay. So, and here's the deal. Do I know how to fix a motorcycle? Yes, right? Was I the technical trainer for Ducati? Absolutely. Do I want to train technicians? It'd be great to work with techs because I love doing it, right? But let's be real. The OEM has the best opportunity to give technicians the newest information on the newest product. Okay. That's their gig. That's their job. I looked at what the OEMs weren't training dealers in, and I wanted to make sure that I gave dealers a very dealer-focused program that helped their business grow and team build the best way possible. You know, like I said in last week's call, I said, how many service writers have had professional communications training? And it's none. You know, right. You listen to them answer the phone. And as I said last week, these aren't stupid people. These aren't people that aren't trainable. It's just no one's ever invested in them to train them properly. So the Powersport Academy is built for how do we improve the customer relationship, the internal culture, and how do we instill policies and procedures that help raise productivity and efficiency without ruining the team culture, because technicians really do deserve that respect. Now, in light to the question or the comments that were about, boots on the ground and technicians like live training and all that, that's absolutely true. But I'm going to give you a caveat to that. One of the first changes I made when I went to Ducati was, instead of making the technicians come to hands-on training and coming in cold for the course and then teaching the course and then doing the hands-on portion of the course, I took that program and said, this isn't efficient. We're wasting too much time out of the shop. What we need to do is give the guys as much theory as possible online and give them knowledge checks and quizzes based on that knowledge of theory before they come to class. That way, when they come to class, we can be T-handles in the hands and we can physically be working on stuff rather than doing death by PowerPoint.
They've earned it.
Yeah, exactly. And I did a very similar thing at Suzuki, where I reduced the amount of wasted, unproductive time, so that if we did a hands-on course, your hands were on T-handles, you were taking something apart, and you were seeing, touching, and feeling. That tactile experience is so important to a technician.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So do the OEMs do more of that piece of it? And is that something where the OEM will send a field rep into the store to train them? Or do the techs have to go to a regional training center for some of these larger companies?
Most OEMs, because I can't talk for all of them, there's a ton, right? So most OEMs require that you attend their training facility and their course at their facility, or a facility they've co-opted with somebody else. Like, I've done a lot of classes at the Wyotech classroom or the MMI classroom, or when PSI was up in Ohio and Cleveland, we did work there. And so, that way you don't have people in Florida flying to California to take a class, right? They can go to MMI in Orlando and take a class. But they were traveling to get there. And that was always an obstacle, especially with service writer and service manager training. A lot of dealer owners were like, why am I paying to send this guy across the country to learn how to answer the phone? That doesn't sound like a good return on investment for me.
Right.
And so that's why I developed the program I did.
Awesome. Robert, I hope that answers your question. I think it sounds like it did. Mark Williamson says, how is product availability in Powersports? You touched on that a little bit, but are they facing the same type of chip shortage and some of the other issues that automotive is facing now?
Absolutely. They've got assembly line shutdowns waiting for chips. They've got, all kinds of issues trying to get on containers. If you actually do the research on logistics and how things are working right now, we're taking in like 10 containers here in the United States, but only sending 4 of them back. So there's a shortage of containers to get from Asia to America. And so
I heard that.
It used to cost like $3,000 to get a container, and now it's like, I heard it's like $17,000 or $18,000 for something that used to be $3,000. And so now you have all these distributors are trying to figure out, hey, what's the magic? How can we make this more affordable and efficient? And unfortunately, there's not an easy answer for that, other than the stock's not available. And they're doing weird things. Like, I can buy something on Amazon and have it at my doorstep in 2 days, but the shop can't go through the distributor and get, dealer cost and have it sent to them in 2 days. They get told it's on back order, but it's on Amazon. It's a really weird deal right now.
Yeah, but even Amazon's changed, though, because I'm a Prime subscriber, and those guys and gals are always here dropping stuff off. I mean, they've even morphed to their own trucks now. It used to be just the Postal Service. Now they've got their own trucks out there. Not all of it good service, by the way, but some stuff you can't get as quickly as we used to get them before. And now you said, I think some franchises have as many as 15 different products that they represent under one roof. That's a lot. Is there much sharing of components within the Powersports industry, or do you need a Ducati coil for a Ducati and that type of thing? Is there any sharing?
There's a guy up in New Hampshire named Bruce who could probably tell you everything that fits on a Ducati that doesn't come from Ducati, right? Like, if Ducati didn't have it, he'd say, oh, well, that's an MV Agusta part number, blah, blah, blah. The guy was an idiot savant. He's fabulous. Anyone that's in Ducati as a technician knows Bruce, and I got to give him his props because he's just a phenomenal human being. But realistically, you would hope for some kind of a CrossFit kind of database, right? Like, wouldn't that be great if you could say, well, which one of these levers fits on this, this, and this? Like, I only need to buy one brake lever fits 20 different bikes, right? There are some tools out there, but it's not as ubiquitous as what you're hoping it would be. And it's very difficult for a lot of parts managers that are new to the industry to kind of get comfortable in figuring some of that out.
Is it from a protectionist standpoint from the OEM that they want to sell just their part, or that's just kind of the way it is?
Well, the OEMs obviously want to sell their own parts, right? In fact, a lot of the training that I gave at the OEM level was monitored by, hey, what's the return on investment for the OEM? Like, how did this increase wholesale part sales to the dealerships, right? So they're very cognizant of what product they're moving. But to talk about whether it's litigious or the cause or why is very difficult. Like, Mitsubishi makes a ton of ECUs out there, right? But like this ECU is marked for Suzuki, and this ECU is marked for this brand, and this ECU is marked for Yamaha, and they're not crossed over, you know?
They're not crossed over because they don't want to, and they're actually the same part, or we'll never know?
I'm going to say I'll never know.
Okay. Now, Robert Allen Carvel says, we went through this in 94 to 2008. I think that might have pertained to his earlier question on technician training. Mark Williamson says, what is the pre-owned market for power sports like? Is it comparable to automotive, where people are spending 36 or 40% higher for pre-owned power sports equipment like they are in the car business? Can you speak to that?
I can a little bit, and it's only because I'm friends with people like Nathan Sannel, who shared the show with his user group today, right?
Yes.
Nathan owns a company called National Powersports. They're like the #1 Triumph dealer in the country, or #2. It seems to flip-flop every other year. And he owns a company that helps dealers with used inventory. And yeah, the market is really seeing a surge in those values. I've also spoken to the people at NPA, National Powersports Auction, and they're experiencing a lot of the same types of demands and increased values for product. There was another auction recently that a dealer friend of mine just went to that was not an NPA auction. And he's really into like old Triumphs and BSAs and things like that. And he was like,
when he threw out BSA.
He's like, you know, bikes that he used to be able to pick up for $3,000 or $4,000 were going for $8,000 and $9,000, you know? And to that point, my son had a KX85. So from just anecdotal evidence, right? We had a KX85 here, and he had outgrown it. And it was, you know, like a barn find bike with new plastics. And everyone knows what I'm talking about. This is a $500, $600 bike all day long. We put the ad up and sold that bike in 2 days for $1,900.
That's incredible. So it's far surpassed automotive.
Yeah, it's the values are crazy. Last week I talked about my Hayabusa, and this week I'll tell you I sold my Hayabusa. You know, and I it was a happy deal. I'm smiling. So
it's a crazy bike, man. Isn't that a 200 mile an hour plus bike?
Yeah, I think 189 is what it's supposed to be governed at, but if you program past that, it'll exceed that.
Wow. And I thought 135 was fast on a bike. I couldn't imagine doing 200.
Things get blurry.
I suppose that there's a difference between split and splat when you hit something at a high rate of speed, whether you're doing 135 or 200. Robert Allen Carvel says, Ford, Stellantis, GM have come up with those classes. When we are talking about service advisors and managers, yes, I agree, the online training. Yeah, because that's a lot of the stuff, you know, it doesn't need to be hands-on where you need to be in the same room with the person. A lot of that stuff can be done over the internet, and there are various companies that are rebuilding their models to be able to accommodate that. And then Robert says regional training center. Are there regional training centers for power sports?
So this is another comparison between automotive and power sports, right?
Yeah.
When you think about the density of automotive service centers, think of Audi, Volkswagen, things like that. I think Volkswagen has like 36, 37 training centers in the country, right? when I was working with Ducati, we used to work out of some of those Audi training centers. And here's why we didn't have our own training center. I'm only actively training, like at Ducati at the time, they had 163 or 166 dealers or something like that. And so I'm going to train 320, 350 technicians in a week or 2 week course, right? So I'm going to be able to do so many here, so many there. And I had like 5 or 6 locations. And then that's it. It's not a year-round activity. And
so there's no need for the investment.
Well, there's a need for the investment, but it's not justified.
I'm talking about the facility. I mean, if there's if that small a pool of techs that are being trained, I can't see an OEM spending the kind of money that it costs us to set up these facilities on a scale.
Yeah, and when you think about the number of people in training, even thinking of not using your own facilities, you know, if you're going to take 3-4 motorcycles, a couple of engines, some hard parts, and a couple of toolboxes, you know, just think about the logistics of moving that thing around 6 or 7 different locations around the country, you know, setting up and tearing down and hotel stays and everything like that. It turns into a pricey adventure, even without the facility. Right.
Yeah, no, there's nothing that's inexpensive for sure. Robert says a lot of OEs relayed on one chip plant in Japan, but the facility burnt down, and that's why we are in this predicament. You know, I'm glad to see that we as a country are investing a lot of money into changing that. Unfortunately, that's not going to do boo for us right now, but certainly going forward, once we are producing more of the chips stateside, I think that'll avoid problems down the road, but it's not going to do anything for right now because we can't be geared up and running that quickly.
Yeah, we're already running behind. Now we got to catch up.
Now, so let's talk about some customer stuff here.
Sure.
Do customers call into the store and complain directly about service? Is there some other kind of process? I know if I'm not happy with something that happens at a dealership, I just pick up the phone. And if they're not responsive, I go online, and that usually takes care of it. How does that work in the Powersports arena?
In the Powersports arena, and that's kind of like one of my selling pain points that I go over with dealers, right? It's like if your cell phone keeps ringing from customers calling about their experience in the service department, I mean, that's more than a red flag that you need some communications training at your front counter, right? Or back counter, right? The service counter. And I would say the experience for the customer is really different than what you experience in automotive. For instance, you know, a lot of car brands are proactive. They know when your car goes in for service. They track the length of the repair order process. There's different things in place now in automotive that Powersports really hasn't caught on to yet. And so if your vehicle's in service for 8 days at a dealership, that OEM may call the customer direct and say, hey, we noticed that your car's at this service center. It's been there for 8 days. You know, can you tell us about the experience? Is there anything we can help you with? Did they provide a rental car? And they go through those proactive steps, right? And especially your premium brands. Powersports doesn't really have that. And so the whole process is really dependent upon the service administrators, the service writer and the service manager communicating properly with tech. Providing communication to the customer, to the technicians, and to the OEM proactively. Because what will happen is they'll continually ghost the customer. You know, the customer calls, they don't return the messages, nothing like that. They'll ghost the customer for 10, 15 days, and then that person will get irate and call the office of whatever brand. And then that's not proactive at all. Right now you're in a reactive situation, and that's how things like buybacks and stuff get out of control inside this particular niche. Buybacks and Powersports are the same as automotive. So typically, if a service department keeps a vehicle for more than 30 days, somebody can file a request for repurchase. And so there's a lot going on there in the background to try and reduce that time in service.
Now that's got to be tied to probably something that's within warranty.
Yeah, it has to be a warranty repair. And then, you know, obviously the customer needs their documentation, and then the manufacturer, if it went to court, the manufacturer would have the ability to talk about circumstances that may have caused the delay. So there's always reasonable is like the term that's in the laws, right? So whenever you go to court, it's like, was this reasonable or was this not reasonable? And it's up to a judge or a jury to try and figure that out. But I don't look at that as being like my role. My role is, how can I teach service advisors and service managers to deal with whatever the circumstance is, but proactively communicate with the customer and keep that relationship growing, making emotional deposits rather than emotional withdrawals, right?
Yeah. So now, if Powersports is behind automotive and the staffing levels are what they are, I don't know. I don't know what the customer satisfaction ratings or expectations are in the Powersports world, but I'm thinking it can't be that good. Am I off with that?
Paul, you end up in a unique scenario when you talk about things like marine, motorcycle, ATV, UTV. You got to remember, for most people, a car is a necessity, right? So the car is a necessity. If the car is down for 3 days at the Ford dealer or the Audi dealer or the Porsche dealer or whatever brand it is, that's their transportation. And even if they got a rental car or a loaner car, they're still pissy about it, right? Because to them, their requirement, their need is not available to them. Right. And when you think about power sports and UTV and marine, you're talking about a toy. In many circumstances, it's a luxury. Very few people use their motorcycle as primary transportation. Okay. And so there's a lot of leeway given. And that's why I always go right back to that communication and leadership part of the training. It's if you proactively communicate with the customer and, again, focus on those emotional deposits instead of withdrawals, regardless of the scenario, if you treat the customer well, you're going to end up with fairly decent customer satisfaction, right? The experience is good if the customer feels valued. And they'll understand if things don't go their way as long as you are transparent, forthright, and proactive. But the minute you ghost somebody, don't return their phone call or delete their email without replying, all cards are off the table. And then that motorcycle, as much of a luxury as it may seem, takes on the air of a need, right, of a requirement. And then people get really pissy.
Now, in automotive, the OEM has a certain expectation, in most cases unrealistically so, where you either get a 95 or higher score or you're a failure. And they pretty much choke the dealers with that kind of a thing. Is there anything like that in the power sports arena where the OEM gets involved with surveys and has an expectation of a certain level, or they screw with the power sports dealer when it comes to allocations and parts and things like that?
So that's the threat that's always in my back pocket when I'm talking to someone that doesn't engage with the training, right? And you know what it's like when you have students that some are fully vested and you have others that are doing it because their boss told them to, right? Yeah. And so the ones that do the training because their boss told them to and they act like it doesn't matter, I'll bring that up. I'll say, are you aware that in the automotive industry, your paycheck can be directly tied to how happy your customer is? Like, nothing says disappointment like getting to the 28th of the month, thinking you've made a $7,000 month, getting a bad survey and coming out with, $3,200. Right. I actually worked with a service manager once who his pay was tied to CSI. And at the end of the quarter, instead of getting a paycheck, he owed money back to the dealer. Oh, he had to rebate it. It was a miserable pay plan, right? I was like, I can't believe you signed that. But it's an example of how CSI has been used as a tool incorrectly, right? Like CSI should be a tool to build the wheelhouse. It should be a tool to set the bar, have goals, pursue goals, and
realistic, attainable,
and pursue growth. But the moment you say do this or I'm taking half your paycheck, it's now become a negative and not a positive growth tool. It's not positive reinforcement, it's negative reinforcement. And as much as some old school guys will say that's what we require to get performance, realistically, there's other tools. There's other tools in our belt where we could build people up. Now, thankfully, to answer your question, in power sports, the OEMs are sampling data from like Pied Piper and some other tools. But to my knowledge, and I want to say to my knowledge, they haven't put that to an actual paycheck yet.
Okay. Well, that seems to make sense because it'd be pretty brutal if they did. I don't think there's a direct correlation between power sports and automotive in that arena. Ron Usher says, I went 35 on my bike, the pedal broke. I think he's referring to a bicycle.
He might be.
Robert Allen Carvel, but now those toys are as much as a car. Yeah, some bikes are up there, and especially in the youth, what you're talking about, how the prices have just skyrocketed. And Robert says it's all about customer service. You know, it's funny. It's always been all about customer service in everything that we do, in every industry. And what I find ironic is that oftentimes on LinkedIn, I'll see somebody put up a post that talks about, you know, the importance of customer service and how that's going to drive business. I'm like, where have you guys been all along? It's been that way since day one. Nothing has changed. It's like these ideas get recycled.
You know, Paul, if I could open that for just a small discussion. Sure. One of the things that I've noticed, and it's in my personal experience, and I've discussed it with other pros in this arena, and I deal a lot with public speakers and things like that. And we have noticed, like with the COVID outbreak and a reduction in people at stores and stuff, it does seem like, it almost seems like COVID became the excuse to like make the customer think you're doing them a favor to be open or making. So I've noticed, you know, and maybe it's a Southern California thing, but I'm talking to people from Idaho, Texas, New Jersey, Washington, and people are saying like there just seems to be like an overall downturn in the level of customer service that's being provided. Like, hey, you're lucky we're here to help you in the first place, you know. And I'm a little bit reticent about that. I feel that if anything, right now is the opportunity for a lot of these companies to go, you know what, we can't backslide, we can't drop the ball. You know, expectations are what they are, regardless of the situation. We have to do our best. And I think it's those companies that are going to see that growth at the end of this cycle.
You know, it's funny you mention that because we had an experience recently where the service was not up to par, but yet when I looked around, I even had a conversation with somebody. I said, look, from what I'm seeing, your staffing levels aren't that different than they were before. However, there is a marked difference in the type of customer service that you had before and you have now. And I don't think my expectations were unreasonable. It was merely an observance of real world things that tie into exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that there's, and I'm not complaining about masks or social distancing or waiting outside to get in the store. I mean, I get it. If you've got these health concerns or you're worried about your staff and you've set these policies, I get it. But the treatment of the customer in the transaction has taken a different color, a different light over the last 18 to 24 months. Yeah. And when I'm looking at this, I'm going, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to take, you know, leadership and communication training to that next level and say, if you exceed the expectations now when everyone else is dropping the ball, that's going to elevate you that much higher.
Yeah. And Michael Weldon, hey, Mike, nice to see you, man. He said, it's there, but you have to work twice as hard to overcome that perspective.
Yeah. Anything worth doing takes work.
Yeah. And you know, it's going to be really interesting because we had our friend over that she came to the surprise birthday party, and you know, she's always been very much on brand loyalty. Okay. She has owned 3 Subarus and she had all intention of buying another Subaru. And she's like me. She buys her car at the dealer and she services at the dealer. So she went to look, and the person that had helped her said, you know, your engine's making a noise. So, well, you know, it's funny you mention that because they didn't mention that to me as I've been bringing it in for service. And then all of a sudden that conversation changed. Like, oh, well, then all of a sudden the value of her car was greater. Why somebody couldn't look in the computer and see that she buys and services her cars there, I don't know, but nobody apparently did until she pointed out that if there's something wrong with my engine, you might want to talk to your service department because they've serviced it since day one.
Day one.
And this is
Yeah.
the third one that they've serviced since day one. So that was a stumbling block. And then all they had was loaded models. She didn't want a loaded model. She had a base model. She wanted something as close to base as possible. And I get it. There's no inventory. So you kind of have to deal with what you have to deal with. But there are ways in communicating that information to the customer. Okay. When you talk about when's the last time the advisor had communication training, and oftentimes that answer is
Never.
zero or never. The person that dealt with her clearly had none of that training either, because she was made to feel as though she was just anybody else that came in off the street, made no difference whatsoever. It was pretty much well, we've got this loaded model, take it or leave it, and if you don't buy it, somebody else is going to buy it. Now, guess what? I'm thinking by Q2 2022, when that bubble goes pop, we're going to go back to a situation which we had before, which is inventory carrying costs being very high, being one of the big problems that keeps dealers up, and also not enough people coming through the door. So all of the people that right now are being told my way or the highway, take that loaded one for $3,000 over sticker or hit the brakes, going to be in for a rude awakening. There's a way to communicate the information to make the customer feel valued rather than just blow them out. Because she left that store and the guy said, well, if you change your mind, call me. I couldn't imagine walking somebody that way. Well, yeah. She went from the Subaru dealership to a Mazda dealership. The guy not only treated her with respect, but spent the time with her on a first-time visit and sold her, found the car to fit her needs better, sold it to her. She took it home. She loves it. And now she's sour on the brand because of that one dealer, which is crazy.
No, and like I said, this is our chance. We can excel. We can go past our competition with the way that we treat our customers. And let's be real. If everyone's lowering the bar, if you just kept the bar where it was at, you're still a winner. Now imagine if you increase it.
Yeah. And right to Mike's point, you have to work twice as hard to overcome that perspective. Now, with regards to, customers' cars breaking down, are they using policy to cover shop breakages and short sell at a high rate?
That is one of the things that really eats me up, Paul. That is, if a shop is spending a ton of money on policy, or what some automotive guys would refer to as 67D, I think was what people would put that in, right? Categorize that. What's causing that? Do you have a lack of training at the technician level that is damaging people's product and you're having to pay for stuff? Or do you have a service writer staff that isn't doing a proper intake and you're paying for things that were damaged before they even entered the shop? How many times does someone say, hey, I just picked up my car and there's a big scratch on the quarter panel, or my wheel I just had tires installed and there's a big gouge in my wheel, right? And you don't have any way to defend or diffuse that. No, so you end up buying it, writing off the labor, and throwing $3,000 or $4,000 on your policy account, right? Well, at the end of the year, and this is going to be a number that a lot of power sports dealers have a hard time wrapping their head around sometimes.
Yeah.
As much as labor costs, if you take all the expenses out, the dealer's really only putting $10 or $12 of pure profit into his pocket for every hour of labor turned.
Wow, right? That's not a lot at all.
No. I mean, so you've got to have your parts value equal to your labor value. I mean, you've got to make sure you hit the mark on everything to be extremely profitable, right? And so if you have a policy account that's getting out of whack, how many hours of labor do you have to charge for to recoup a $3,000 policy expense?
Too many.
So when I start breaking those numbers, when I start breaking those numbers down for administrative people, they start realizing, we could do the multi-point inspection form properly. We could take pictures at intake, because there's tools that they have that do that stuff. They just don't use them, right? And so a lot of the dealers, I'll ask them, hey, what's your policy account look like? And what do you think the root cause of that is? Is it a lack of training on the technical side? Because I can help you with that. Or is it a lack of training at the counter side? Because I can help you with that. We can put policies and procedures in place that protect the dealer's money.
Is policy a big problem, generally speaking, across the board at Powersports?
The first time I really noticed that policy was a big deal was when I worked at a Dodge dealer. I was a service manager at a Dodge store, and we were spending a ton of money just giving people stuff they didn't want to pay for. It was like anyone that argued on the service drive, well, I'll go ahead and write that off the 67D. And the service director would come down and I'd be like, well, things are usually black and white, and this is kind of a gray area here, so I'm going to write this off to 67D. And I thought he was pretty genius in the way that he communicated with customers that way. But when I took over running things, I was like, what am I going to do with all this money every month that we're not collecting? And that's when I started really focusing on how do I reduce that number? And that's been a focal point for me at almost every position down the line. So whether it's automotive, motorcycle, marine, there's a certain amount that gets written off or discounted. Even when I worked at Pep Boys, I used to work at Pep Boys, and we would sell shocks for like $1 or $3 a piece over the back counter so that we could still keep our labor dollars on the ticket, right? And it's just the weird way that you manipulate numbers to get the report you need for your district manager, right? But at the end of the day, did you serve the customer and did you serve your employer? Because as a service writer, you have to serve both.
Right. Interesting. Let's see here. Is there plenty of repair business right now, or are the techs going home early in Powersports?
All right. Now that's another one too. So when I'm talking to a dealer, I'm doing like an audit or a discovery call. One of the questions I ask is, hey, what time every day do your technicians go home? And they might say, oh, well, so-and-so usually leaves around 3, or so-and-so leaves at 4, or usually they stay late, but every now and then I see guys leaving early, right? So these things will come up. And I'll say, well, how many motorcycles are at your facility right now for repair? And they'll go 60, 55, whatever the number is. I go, oh my goodness. Well, how in the world, with all that work to do, are your guys going home early?
Yeah.
And that's when the service sales funnel that I train comes into play. Last week, we talked about parts availability and how it messes with the service scheduling and the dispatch for the repair orders.
Yeah.
If people don't dispatch the work properly in the service department, what'll happen is you end up with ebbs and flows in the service area, meaning a technician might have a $1,500 week one week, and then next week, have a $400 week. And his paychecks will go like this because they're not following a process that levels it out. So if they're going home early, the shop overall is losing efficiency, and the technician's losing flagged hours personally.
No, if you've got 8 techs in an average store, how many techs typically in an average Powersports store?
It can range anywhere from mom and pop shops with 1 technician to large shops with 10 or 12. There's a couple shops here in Southern California that are big, 25, 30 technicians. But realistically, most of the shops in my wheelhouse, most of the shops I deal with have between 2 and 6 technicians. So you only got 6 dudes. And if you look at, what's 6 times 8? 48. So you plan on, okay, how are we going to get 48 hours a day flagged out of the shop? Just start with the basics. Do simple math, right? And try and figure out, where are we missing the ball on this? And if guys are going home routinely at 3 instead of 5, well, what's 2 times 6? 2 times 6 is 12. 12 times 5 is 60. So I'm missing 60 hours at $140, $130 an hour.
A lot of money.
And now double that because of parts, right? Because you should have a 50-50 parts and labor split. That's a lot of revenue to be losing because you're not dispatching the work properly.
What's retention look like at a Powersports store?
Customer retention or employee retention?
Both. Customer
retention's pretty poor, but there's many reasons why. So earlier we said a car's like a responsibility, a need, and a Powersports item is more of a luxury. Yeah. So because it's an enthusiast sport, because it's an enthusiast thing, like bicycles, a lot of guys work on their own bicycles. If you get a flat on your bicycle, you repair it. If you need to do an oil change on your GSXR, you'll probably do it, right? However, if the check engine light comes on, or my front fork seal's leaking, or I notice I've got a coolant leak, I'll probably take it to the dealer. Or if I get a recall notice, I'll take it to the dealer. But a lot of stuff gets done at home or an aftermarket shop. And now I'm sure you know the term, dealers are stealers, right? So nobody, I'm not gonna say nobody, but a lot of people don't have a lot of faith or trust in their dealership to get a fair and equitable deal at the service counter. And that's part of that communication, to tell people, this is why you're being charged this is what we're bringing to the table, and this is why it's valued at this dollar amount. But if you don't have that discussion with the customer and they're not sure what they're actually paying for, they get the impression that they're being ripped off.
Michael Weldon says, starts with selling hours, not cars coming in. Now, inventory. Are the PDIs pretty much kept up on time, or did it go into a black hole and all of a sudden there's some emergency? Oh, this Johnny bought a new bike, so we need to get it into the shop now.
There's always going to be the sales emergency, always, just like automotive. There's always going to be some customer that shows up Friday at 4:00 in the afternoon who just got paid, right, and can qualify for a loan and wants the one bike that's still in a crate that hasn't been PDI'd. You might have 6 black ones on the floor, but he wants the red one, right? And so it's like, But part of the training that I do is I really work on interdepartmental communication and leadership with the managers. Yeah. And I believe that the service department is the hub of the whole store. So I tell these service managers, hey, you need to have a daily agenda. And part of your daily agenda is to double check with the sales department and see what their perceived requirements are for the rest of your week. And so instead of waiting for a Friday emergency at 4:00 in the afternoon, what if you had that conversation on Tuesday where you said, hey, what's missing on the floor? You got 6 black ones over there. Do you need that red one? It's in the crate. Imagine if that got built Wednesday or Thursday, Friday's not even a problem now, right? But it generally comes down to a lack of communication and not understanding the expectations. The other expectation is, at a car lot, I can prep a car pretty fast. I could be in sales. I could turn my customer over to management, get him in the F&I office. And while it's in F&I, I can get that car back to a detailer, get it prepped, get the wax and pinstripe package done, or whatever I got to do. What's that?
There's not a lot to do, realistically.
Not a lot to do. With motorcycles, a lot of it, if it's still in a crate, you have to assemble some of it. So you got to take it out of the crate. You got to put the windscreen on, the mirrors on, the seat, charge the battery. Well, how long do you charge a battery? Overnight, right? So you're not prepping that in an hour.
Not a lot of deliveries if it's still in the crate.
Yeah, so dealers need to be proactive. They need to have a charging rack full of backup batteries that are pre-charged, and basically swap them out, like first in, first out kind of thing. Yep. And then, keep a process going. But there has to be a process. If that communication and process isn't in place, it's always an emergency. And then you always end up with managers that hate each other, right? You'll always see services throwing the parts guy under the bus. Sales is throwing the service guys under the bus. And at the end of the day, if the dealership's treated like a big giant mall, everybody's their own store. But in order for the mall to succeed, all the stores have to agree.
That is correct. Now, in service, is there confusion or crowding in the service? Is there a service drive like in a car shop? And before you answer that, when I used to take my bike back in the day to the shop, I seem to remember wheeling it in the front door. I don't remember, any kind of a service drive whatsoever. And then they'd kind of wheel it around the counter into the back. Is there a service drive environment in a lot of stores? And is there an even flow of service drop off, or is it sometimes like automotive where you got 100 people that drop in at 7:30 in the morning, or they line up before the bay doors open?
This is a subject of perception again, right? Now, to your point, I'm old, you're old, right? We used to take like those old shops, you'd wheel the bike in the front and do the whole thing. Now they have service entrances and stuff like that. Some shops are really nice. They have like a roll-up door you can actually ride into, put the side stand down, walk up to the service podium and greet a service writer inside the building, with like a drive-through kind of thing. But to your point, out of habit, I still call it the service drive. But people in Powersports, when I talk to them, I go, hey, how busy is your service drive? They're like, what the hell are you talking about? right? Because they don't have those terms a lot of time. So you shop at Home Depot, right? Have you been to Home Depot?
I try to avoid it whenever possible, but I do go there.
Every Home Depot is set up identical to the next Home Depot, right? So you
Yeah.
start at one side, it's got building supplies, and at the other end is garden. And then the store is put together in the order that a house is built. So it's building supplies, framing, plumbing, paint, decor, electrical, and something else, right? It's the way you build a house. Landscaping's at the last thing. So whenever you go to like a Ford Quality Care, you can find your way around. Whenever you go to a Home Depot, you can find your way around, right? Go to a Walmart, you can find your way around. Go to any Powersports dealership, and there's no other just like it. It's always something different and strange. And so that perception is a lack of communication with the customer and a lack of communication with the staff, right? So they don't understand that they need to teach their customers how to do business with them, how to set those expectations. So when a customer calls and says, can I bring my bike in on Tuesday? The service writer usually never says, absolutely, what time's best for you? You know, we usually have drop-offs between, 8 and 12. What time works best for you? Instead, they go, yeah, we open at 8 o'clock, and then they hang up the phone. So you end up with 8 or 10 people standing out there at 8 o'clock in the afternoon, and you end up with this mad rush. You want to spend 15 to 20 minutes with every customer. But if you've got a mad rush, the industry standard says we're spending 3 minutes per write-up with our customers.
Wow, that's a significant drop in the required time that you need to do a good job.
If you can't spend the 15 or 20 minutes, do a quality walk around, an MPI write-up, and pictures at drop-off, you don't have any accountability. You don't have any pre-sales. You didn't sow any seeds for the future conversation to sell them something. All you did was process a person. And a clerk could do that, right? So a service advisor is not a clerk.
Interesting. Now, in automotive, we've got the OEM telling the dealer, this is what we want the facilities to look like. These are the chairs we want you to buy. These are the tiles, everybody's favorite. These are the tiles that we want you to put down. Is there such a thing even in Powersports? It doesn't sound like it.
Yes.
There is.
Yes and no. Yes and no. So they call it corporate identity, CI packages, right? Yeah. And if you've ever been to a Ducati dealer, you know what Ducati CI is, right? Beautiful Italian marble in the showroom, nice point of purchase displays, wall panels with beautiful accessories hanging in size order, right? Like Bloomingdale's. I mean, it's just nice inside. Triumph has a very similar program. KTM has a program. So everyone's got their thing. But how do you, as a dealer owner, remember, if you're a multi-line dealer with 10 brands, how do you allocate the space and the expense to dress each part of your store the way that OEM wants you to? You can't.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound like possible.
And from a service perspective, there are some brands that say you need a minimum of so many lifts. You know, the wall needs to be painted this way. This is your toolbox. It has to be visible. It has to this, it has to that. But for the most part, a lot of the brands say, we wish you would do this, but we can't force you to.
Wow, right? Interesting.
A lot of dealers miss the point that in America, based on dealer agreements, because I've heard the word franchise a couple of times. They're not franchises. It's a dealer agreement. And in a lot of states, the dealer holds the power in the agreement. So they're an independent business. They're an independent business, and they can do whatever they want. And it's the OEM really doesn't have a lot of pull. Now, that being said, I'm not telling people to go out and screw the OEM. What I'm saying is find a way to work with the OEM, but not for the OEM. Right. Find a way to represent them the best way possible while still taking care of your customers and your staff and your internal culture. But remember that your business is primary. If you're the dealership, your business is primary. And your power partner in the situation is your distributor.
Now, just to let everybody know, we are going to go over, because I still have a number of questions that I want to ask.
Uh-oh.
So just to give you a forewarning in advance. So what's the average working process? How many days on average does a service customer visit the shop?
I think it was Robert that asked about parts flow or equipment flow earlier in the comment section. And that has greatly affected our work in progress, as you can imagine. What
was it before and what is it now?
I'm seeing a lot of data in the dealers that I'm working with where their average ticket might be 38, 39 days.
Wow. That's
Now,
mind-blowing.
keep in mind, that'll be 1 or 2 bikes that are in there where something's on back order and the thing's been there for 2 months. That still counts towards the average, right? So if I've got a bike in there for 2 months and other bikes that have been there for a week and a half, that average still kicks out to 30 days, right? So, so it's a very difficult proposition to wrap your head around altogether. But when I talk to these dealers, I'm really emphatic about what processes can we implement that lowers your work in progress. And the other thing to remember is most dealers, and this is going to blow your mind, Paul, because you're automotive. As a service writer in automotive, you dread the end of month because what happens at the end of every month? Every RO must be closed, right? And you're like, and as a service writer, you're like, this is mind numbing. The car's right there. He's still working on it. I can't close the ticket. And people are arguing, you got to close the ticket. And you're like, this defies logic. In the power sports industry, many shops will have open tickets for years that they never close. The customers picked up the motorcycle. It's got an O-ring or a drain plug charged out on it, and they never closed the ticket. So one of the first things, it's mayhem. So you go into a shop and you go, hey, let me see an open repair order list. And then I physically, if I'm doing an on-site audit, I'll go out to the lot and I'll literally check off every bike that I can put my hands on. And then I'll go back and I'll say, okay, you have 347 open ROs and you have 52 motorcycles. We got some work. Yeah, we got some work to do. And then you got to figure out, like, are you going to write off? Are you going to write off the parts that are missing? Are you going to return parts that are sitting on the part shelf that were never installed? Are you going to call back customers that had a recall ticket that never got the recall done? I mean, there's a lot of work to do in that regard. Now, once you get your open repair order list to reflect your actual service inventory, now you can start working on processes to try and lower that work in progress.
How prevalent is that scenario that you just rolled out here across the industry?
I feel like I'm talking bad about the power sports industry right now. You got to remember, I love the industry. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. And I said they're not stupid people. They just haven't been trained, right? But it's prevalent. I'm going to say I could go to 65% of the dealers that I work with and go, let me see your open repair order list. And it's not going to match what's on the lot to be worked on. And there's a lot of reasons why. A lot of shops will have a policy that they put in place. They don't even realize it's like quasi illegal, right? But the parts guy will say, I can't order that part without a repair order to put it against. And so the service writer writes a repair order up. The bike might not even be there, but he writes the repair order up to order the part. And then they never close the RO to say part ordered, returning for service, returning for installation at a later date. They just leave the RO open. So when the customer brings the bike in a month later, they put the special order part in. Well, now that ticket technically has been open for 32, 33 days.
So that adds to the number.
Adds to the work in progress.
I was going to say, because I was going to ask you, have you seen the movie Walking Tall?
Yeah.
The guy with the big stick. That would be me, because there's no way I would run a shop and have open ROs of that magnitude ever. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would have health problems.
Again, we go back to, if they've never been trained, they don't know to worry about it. If it's never been, because I come from an automotive background. I used to get beaten, right? Like you have to close
the guy with the stick.
Yeah. And so, but it always brings to question to me, like, how do you do inventory every year? How do you do a parts inventory every year if you've got open ROs and don't know where the parts are?
You can't.
You can't.
How much does the average in dollar amount? What is it? Well, I guess it's hard to say, but I guess you can average, because there's going to be high, there's going to be low, but on average, how much money is tied up in a parts department? Or do they even know based on what you just told me?
So I will tell. So anecdotally, I'll tell you a couple of real life situations. A lot of what I do when things go downstream, like once I do the communication, the leadership, the culture, all that stuff, we start getting into things like, what does your obsolete parts list look like for your parts department? Because they've ordered stuff for people that's never been installed, and they don't return the inventory, so it just sits back there and takes up space and collects dust. And so I'll go through the obsolete parts list, and I'll say, okay, we need to have a sidewalk sale, right? And I've worked at dealers as a consultant where I've gone in and said, you've got $95,000 in stuff sitting here that needs to get liquidated right now. You're either going to sell it in a sidewalk sale and take a loss on it, or you're going to try and return it to the dealer and pay the restocking fee, or return it not to the dealer, but to the distributor and take the restocking fee.
Isn't there a time limit on that though, like in automotive?
Well, there are, but the brands, most of the brands will have, I'm having a brain fart. I can't remember the name of it, but they'll have every year, they'll have a, hey, for this 2-week period or for this month, you can return a certain percentage or a certain dollar amount or a certain value of your current inventory for full credit.
Like an amnesty, full credit, like an amnesty program. Yeah,
some of them are full credit. Some of them are with a 15% restocking fee. They all have different programs. Remember, there's a ton of different distributors.
Does that happen every year with many of the distributors?
I'm thinking all of the ones that I've interacted with personally have done almost an annual program like that.
But here's the thing. If you have that many open ROs, and if the inventories are that off, I'd be hard pressed to have anybody organized enough to be able to put something like this together, even though it's in their best interest. Because let's face it, in automotive, when your stuff goes into the obsolescence zone and you have to sell it at a fire sale, you're lucky if you get 25% to 50% on the dollar. Lucky. So if these distributors have a program where they're giving up to 85% back for returning dead stock, I mean, that's ahead of everybody as far as in the dealer's favor is concerned.
Yeah, and there's limitations. There's things they might deny. Has to be in the original packaging. It can't be ever installed. There's all those rules.
Yeah.
But to your point, if they never do the audit on the open repair order list and they never go to the work in progress part storage area and retrieve that stuff and put it back in inventory, they don't know that it's obsolescent inventory and to send it back.
Right. Yeah, that was my point.
So there's a lot to it. And typically, it's a fair amount of money.
Wow. So Mark Williamson's got a couple of good points here. He says, ROs open for years is just negligent. I would be very inclined to agree with you, Mark. And his follow-up is there no controller CFO who looks at accountability? I would imagine there's no CFO in the building or in the office.
We're talking smaller enterprises, smaller businesses, right? Yeah. So you might have an office manager, a parts manager, a sales general manager, a service manager, right? And so imagine, if you would, that office manager is busy with things like payroll and figuring out how to pay guys on their flat rate checks, right? Some of them have ADP, some of them don't. Some of them are doing the stuff manually still. And so it really comes down to who's going to audit this. And a lot of these dealers might hire like an accountant to come in, right? Or like contract that out. But that accountant is really looking at like P&L statements and reports out of ADP, but they're not really like checking inventory or auditing things or doing things hands-on. Right. So garbage in, garbage out. If the information coming from the system doesn't support obvious deficiencies, the person that's hired as the contractor to check that isn't going to see it.
Well, that opens up another avenue then. I know that in the automotive space, you hear about these stories about a CFO that has walked off with $1.8 million or $2.3 million. And that's an area where they actually have more control, or seemingly.
Yeah.
It sounds like this could be ripe for some actor to come in knowing full well that, hey, this is easy pickings here, because by the time they catch up with whatever it is that I've walked off with, I'm on a beach in Tahiti somewhere.
Again, size of business, opportunity, what's the risk value proposition, things like that, all of that concerned. But you do hear the occasional story sometime of where, some partner has skimmed off the top and disappeared with a large sum of money, right?
Yeah.
But realistically, I don't think these businesses are large enough in their cash flow to attract that kind of theft. I mean, it happens, but I don't think they're like a target. Like, I don't think people are going, you know what I got to do? I got to get 10 motorcycle dealers and go make $16 million this year, because it's just not that flow.
The opportunity is greater in automotive just based on the cost involved.
Well, and on the volume too. I mean, think about how many units a Ford dealer might sell in a month, and then think about how many units a Powersports dealer, and the margin and the actual cash markup that the Powersports dealer is going to turn. It's just a whole lot more attractive in the automotive field.
As an owner, are most of these owner operators like in the store every day?
That's hit or miss. That really is. There's a lot of silent partners or people that might be involved in other businesses, and they got involved in Powersports as a passion point, or they ride and they thought it would be fun to open a dealership, and they might have a partner or a group of partners that run it, right? And so they might have somebody on site that's there, but they might not actually be. Or you've got guys that are really passionate and run it themselves. A lot of times, and again, I got to be really careful and frame how I say things, because I don't mean them to be insults. It's just the nature of the beast. If you're an enthusiast and you buy into a dealership because you always thought it'd be awesome to own a dealership, but you're not really ready to track the parts and the ROs and audit the processes and do those things, you need to hire people that'll do it for you that you can trust, right? Or don't do it at all. Like, don't get the dealership.
Right.
I've worked at a lot of places where the dealer owner actually just kind of became like the friend of everyone that works there, and they just kind of hang out, and it's that gets to be dangerous, because what happens is you get a clique of customers that hang out all day and don't spend money. They drink Mountain Dews and lean over your parts counter and watch YouTube, right?
Right.
And then when the active customer does come in, that culture is kind of, I don't want to say toxic, but it's not welcoming to the new person. They can sense it. They walk in and they don't feel welcomed. And so business really stagnates and fails to grow like it could in that environment.
Interesting. Is there generally a good communication or good cooperation between departments?
Earlier, I kind of laid that out a little bit, where I said it seemed like service always blames parts, right? Parts is never guilty for anything, by the way. I got to throw that out there and have fun with those guys. But it's like, if there's a problem in service, the service manager is the one who's going to get yelled at. It's never the parts dude, right?
Yeah.
Sales is pretty much always going to have an issue with service. They're always going to say PDIs are in a black hole. I can't get my used bikes out on time. I can't, they messed up a customer's bike before delivery and they ruined the sale. There's always something where sales doesn't like service and service doesn't like parts, and that kind of spirals around, right? And there's a lot of instances where sales is responsible to order stuff through parts and accessories for bikes they sold and things like that. And those processes in automotive, do they still do the WEO process where you give somebody a WEO?
I was just going to ask you, did they do the same thing in the bikes?
So they try to do a similar thing, but remember, the power sports industry is not automotive. So the accessories guys in automotive have a couple of main sources they get things through. Yeah. Parts guys, parts managers have catalogs, just hundreds of catalogs where they order stuff. And if they don't have a clear process from sales to parts to order all the stuff, things get lost in the mix. And then it becomes a really ugly communication situation. So one of the things I coach is, how do we coach these people to use their communication and leadership skills to work with each other proactively and support one another and edify each other, so that, you look good by making other people in your building look good, right? And too many people think that they make themselves look good by making their coworker look like an idiot. Well, that's not the way to do it. And customers pick up on that. So you really got to find a way to edify. I've worked at places where if a salesman comes back to the service department trying to poach customers out of the service drive, the service manager gets all ticked off and there's going to be an argument and a fight and a God knows what. Realistically, what should happen is the service manager should be breeding a relationship with sales based on trust, so that when the customer is in a position to need to trade in or think about getting a new vehicle, it's up to the service manager at that point with those good relationships in place to say, hey, Mr. Customer, this is going to be like $3,000 to fix this. That'd be a really good deposit on a new bike. Do you want me to fix the old bike, or do you want me to introduce you to a salesman I trust and get you onto a new unit? And then they walk the person up there physically, do the handoff, give them a customer, give the sales department the repair order and a condition report of the vehicle they're trading in, and pass it over. You do that 5 or 6 times as a service manager talking to sales, and they'll stop trying to poach people out of your service drive.
Well, here's the ironic part. They still get the service business,
and you still get the job because you got to recondition the bike.
Yeah. Now, to that point, do they wholesale bikes, or everything? They take everything in, they recon it, and they sell it.
You're kind of hitting one of my sweet spots there, man. It's a pain point for me. I really, really enjoy shops that take the trade in and then do the reconditioning. And I love that relationship I just talked about with sales and service. If they have a really good relationship, the sales manager and the service manager can communicate, and the service manager can say, hey, you just took in that dirt bike and the ACV was this much, because they should have that information. The ACV was this much. If we put a new decal kit on that, or a set of Warp 9 wheels, or a new tire, or whatever, you're going to be able to get that much more for retail. Boom, boom, boom. Right? Like I love when service can work with sales to build, a sales model, right? Because you're going to sell that forward through the retail process and make the whole dealership more money.
Right.
But in a lot of dealerships, the sales department is like, well, I'm not going to spend any more money with service. They're trying to rip me off. And it's like, no, if you're going to improve the value of the motorcycle and improve its retail value, you're going to recoup that expense and then some at the retail side. But to your point, a lot of dealerships really focus on the wholesale avenue. They'll take in bikes that aren't there. Like Harley Davidson's famous for this. If I wanted to trade in my Ducati at a Harley Davidson store, chances are they're going to hop on the phone and get a buy bid for the bike. They're never going to keep the bike. They're going to wait the 72 hours or whatever it is and then forward that thing to a wholesaler. And that's really? Places like, so that's when like NPA or my friend Nathan at National Powersports would jump in and kind of help either liquidate the unit or help you find units that match your brand better.
Are they more old school and when it comes to placing bikes, or is there a sophisticated auction setup like with cars and online?
It's pretty sophisticated nowadays. Yeah, either source, National Powersports and NPA both. NPA's got multiple locations. It's national, and it's a pretty tight deal, man. You can preview the equipment, you can put in bids, you can do the whole. It's modern.
Is there a dominant player in that space? In the used cars or used bikes?
Those would be the two that I'd feel comfortable mentioning.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and it's there's in the cruiser world, in the Harley Davidson world, there's whole other channels for that stuff, and so I really should bring that up. Like I'm not an expert in that one brand, because there's too many experts in that field. Harley Davidson did a really good job on building that infrastructure. And then they've really got a lot of specialized players in that market. And I'm not playing in that market too much.
Now,
I'm open to.
I know that in automotive, there are some stores that do a nice job with accessories. They've got that number of cars or trucks built out with the equipment, and they make the money on it. But then there's a lot of stores that don't. They take more of a wait and see approach. They have the dusty spoiler sitting on the shelf somewhere, and they're hoping that the customer is going to get excited to see that and want to put it on their car. And I don't think that's a good way to market it. Do motorcycle places or power sports places tend to build out a percentage of their inventory with a lot of these accessories to kind of personalize their bikes and increase their profits? or is it an add-on sale afterwards more often than
I
not?
prefer them to. I prefer them to have a couple units really built out, because let's be real. I'm really a fixed operations trainer and coach, right?
Yeah.
And that to me gives the fixed operations an ability to showcase their skill set through the sales process up front, right? So even if the dealer doesn't immediately sell that unit, it's on display for everybody to see that's what that parts and service department was able to put together for that unit to be on display, right? So I think that's important. A lot of people there's people that can drive by a barn, right, and see a dilapidated Chevelle with a missing fender and sitting on rusty steel wheels and flat tires. And there's people that can go and drive by and go, what a piece of junk. And then there's other people that can drive by and go, oh man, could you imagine that in midnight Marina Pearl blue with a white stripe? That'd be amazing.
That color I was thinking.
Right. And to my point, the people that see the rusted out piece of junk are the same people that they're not going to optimize or maximize that sale during the sales process because they can't visualize the finished product. But if there's one on the floor and you can say, hey, you're buying a bike that's very similar to this one, and this one has a tinted windscreen, and this one has different foot pegs, and this one has, luggage on it. This one has the pannier setup on it.
Or
this one has a
pipe with a very large.
Yeah, this one has a lowering kit, so you can, put both feet down on the ground securely. And when you do that, it really showcases your fixed operations from a sales perspective, which I really, really enjoy. The problem without, and I got to cover this part. You said like a lot of places will have like parts, like a rusty, like a dusty spoiler, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why. When you go to the food market, like when I go to Albertsons here in town, or where do you go? Piggly Wiggly or something? I mean, what do you have where you live? There's a reason why there's impulse items. There's reasons why there's candy bars and sodas and stuff at the checkout aisle, right? Because people are going to make that decision based on that moment. And if they see the dusty spoiler, it's just a part hanging on the wall. But if they see it on the vehicle that they're thinking about possibly buying, they've already taken ownership of it in its current state.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that something that is done typically on this? Who makes that decision? Is it the front end of the store or the back end that decides?
Typically the front end of the store will say, hey, we want we really want to put some Rizoma stuff on this one, right? Or like Rizoma is a brand that makes really exclusive like MV Agusta Ducati stuff, right? Yeah. And it's like anodized bits and pieces that really dress it up. So that sales will say, oh, we really want to outfit this. Or sometimes the parts department will say, hey, we're bringing on a new distributor for Triumph accessories. So we want to showcase a bike with that. And they'll go to the owner. The owner will say, that's a pretty good idea. I'll let you guys do that. And then they go through sales to pick the bike. And then, of course, have service do the work.
When somebody buys a bike, do people order bikes, or is it mostly what's there?
Pre-sales going to be the buzzword of the year, I think. A lot of bikes that are on the floor now aren't even available for purchase. They've been pre-sold, or they're waiting for delivery, or for your high volume items because of the broken supply chain. And so it's really important now that our sales departments adopt that whole idea of pre-sales and trying to really build a book of sales that's forthcoming rather than trying to sell what's in inventory all the time.
How long is it typically to order a bike?
Oh, I couldn't even guess. Right now. Again, with the supply chain and things coming in and out, it's really, really difficult.
Before COVID, if one were to walk into a dealership and want to order a bike, is it a month and a half? Is it 2 months?
A month to 6 weeks, to order, get delivered, have assembled, PDI'd, inspected, and then ready for delivery. Yeah. I'd say a month to 6 weeks. And other brands could do it much more quickly, especially if they have the inventory. But if it's got to come on a boat, you're looking at time.
Yeah, and that's in so many industries too. One of our businesses is a yarn business, and we are in the same situation where some of the inventory is just taking forever to come over. Stuff that we planned on having a month ago is still in transit. So that's That's the problem that everybody's having across the board.
Yeah, yeah. It makes it a real challenge. I mean, think of if you're in the sales department and you're paid on commission, how frustrating is that? You know, people keep coming in and going, I want A, B, and C. And you're like, I got X, Y, Z. Do you want that? No, I want A, B, and C. If I wanted X, Y, Z, I would have asked for X, Y, Z.
Right.
When can I get A, B, C? Right. And then you go into the pre-sale talk and you got to try and stay positive and hey, I'm really trying to help you here. And this is what we're going to try and do. And let me do some research and get back to you. And, you know, do you want to put a deposit on it and hold it? And it's like, I haven't even seen it in person yet.
Right, exactly.
You know, very difficult. And I really feel for him. It's tough.
Wow. Well, we've certainly learned a whole lot about the power sports industries between last week's show and we're coming up on an hour and a half of this week's show. So I can't thank you enough. It's been very educational. I appreciate the time that you spent with us. This is great stuff, man. Thank you.
Dude, I appreciate the exposure. You know, someone might see this and go, man, I need Powersport Academy right now. And if they do, they can go to powersportacademy.com. They can schedule a discovery call or they can sign up, whatever they want to do. The main thing is just adding value to the people that we serve. You know, I know that you're real passionate about that. I'm super passionate about it. And when I help a dealer, it's not just the guy that owns the store. I look at it like every single person in that fixed operations department is going to have a more stable Christmas shopping experience, you know, because we're increasing their revenue and adding stability to their work environment.
Yeah. So that's great stuff. Thank you. Before we tune off here, just a reminder, we have the vendor showcase coming up on Thursday. Thankfully, we dodged the bullet on the storm that was supposed to come. I have a couple of vendor spots that we're supposed to shoot tomorrow where there's some COVID involved that may affect those recordings. So not quite sure. As of this moment, I think we're on schedule for Thursday. If there are some COVID-related issues that impact some of our vendors that are part of the show, then that may require a reschedule. But I will make everybody aware of what's going on as soon as I know that information. I'll have more information, I'd say, by Monday or Tuesday regarding that, because I got a couple of messages on stuff that we're shooting tomorrow where there are some concerns. So hopefully those things, you know, people are safe and everything works out good. So thank you. I'm going to play the short trailer for the show coming up, and then we'll see you next week on Sunday Night Live. Thanks again. Thank you very much, Kurt.
No worries. Awesome.
I'm very excited to announce our dealervendormatch.com vendor showcase happening on Thursday, August 26th. So here it is in a nutshell. Dealers, we know how much you hate the dreaded cold calls, but we also know that you need some of the technologies that are available today to become more efficient and profitable. Vendors, we know how difficult it is to get in front of the key personnel at dealerships. We get it, because we've been there. So here's a one-day event that's complimentary to dealers to bridge the gap between the dealers and the vendors. We're going to be marketing this nationally to key dealership personnel. Email, social media campaigns, you name it, we're getting the message out there. So sponsorship opportunities are available. We're already recording some of the sessions now, so don't miss out. More information will be announced as we get closer to the event. Hope to see you there. That's dealervendormatch.com's vendor showcase happening Thursday, August 26th.